What is going on, guys? This is Meister, and today I'm actually going to be reviewing the card Meister hand trap that a lot of people know, and it's funny because it was out there in the game for so long, but it never really saw play until I think I want to say at least 2017, 2018-ish, and now it's kind of arguably one of the better ones sometimes, and it was extremely competitive in the Orcus deck because it was a dark attribute monster that, worst case, you just Allure of Darkness it away. Same thing with DD Crow, Phantasme. It's funny because that same logic that was a thing for Orcus is also now a thing for pure Sky Striker, where the Sky Striker decks are actually playing Allure of Darkness with dark-only hand trap attributes, well, except for Ash maybe, but today we're actually going to try to see how good the card is, its applications, but before we start, you already know it, friendly reminder to like and subscribe if you do, and if this video gets a lot of likes, maybe let's just say 1,000, I'm going to keep making hand trap reviews, meta game breakdown reviews, literally every single week, so please, it would really motivate me a lot to keep making videos like these, and now let's jump right into it. Okay, so first of all, for the stats of the monster, it's kind of a big boy. I'm pretty sure it has like 1700 attack, it's level 4, as I said, it's dark, I think it's Fiend, and yeah, I mean, you can make rank 4s with the card, so the worst case scenario is, ironically, you being able to kind of beat down with the card. Honestly, it's probably not as good as being like a spellcaster tuner, like Effect Veiler is, because that is used for Needle Fiber into Selene and to Access Code, so a little bit more relevant, but Meister allowing you to make rank 4s could actually be interesting in case it is useless as a hand trap, but obviously today I'm going to give you all the arguments why you would want to play Meister as a hand trap, obviously. So unlike DD Crow, I want to say this card can kind of be used against every single deck in the meta, and is also very good against a few rogue-ish decks, if you can consider Altergeist and Eldritch to be rogue-ish. Altergeist Melusik, it uses its effect in the graveyard. You can just go Meister negate, and it basically acts as an Ash. And for Eldritch, this card I want to say is a bit better than DD Crow. Well, not really. It depends. It is, unlike DD Crow, it actually can negate Scarlet Sanguine in the grave, because DD Crow, what are you really trying to do? Like DD Crow the Scarlet, they're just gonna chain it, so it doesn't really work the way you would want it to work. But for Scarlet, it actually does work. It can negate Eldritch, it can negate Cursed Outland, which is also interesting, even though it shouldn't come up too often. It is extremely good against the meta decks, and this is what I'm going to try to tackle today. So just try to think about it. Tri-Brigade. A lot of cards in the graveyard have effects like Kit, Nerval, so if you're using the Meister on their Nerval, you're basically preventing them to get a search, so they are kind of going -1. Yeah, they got their fuel, their graveyard a little bit, but unlike Ash, you can kind of time it a bit better in a way. It is a card that also can negate the Beer Bloom, so it is also similar to Ash in a certain way. Honestly, one of the coolest things about Meister is the fact that it's not once per turn, so when you draw multiple copies of it, you can use maybe the first copy very early on, and then the second copy quite after, when your opponent is actually trying to search the interruptions from the deck to the hand. So that's something that you could do, so hit the the Nerval, and then hit the Bear Bloom right after that. Against Drytron, it's very similar to Ghost Bell. It literally hits everything in the grave, like all the Drytrons, because they're not like Infernoid monsters, they really do trigger. So Meister would negate every single one of them, and it would negate cards that even Ash technically cannot stop. For example, Natasha's graveyard effect, Elder Entity Entis is graveyard effect, which is also applicable against decks that play Dogmatica Punishment, or, strategies that might use Nadir Servant and then send the App Cologne. You could be able to Meister the App Cologne. Obviously, Ash kind of does the same, and Ash has the ability to negate the Nadir Servant as well. But again, Meister is supposed to be that extra option, I guess you can say, when you are already playing the other hand trap. One issue that I do have with the card is that unfortunately it negates the effect and not the activation, and for some people that might be kind of good, because for example with Ash, negating the effect can be better than negating the activation. If you Ash a Shaddoll Fusion, if you have an additional copy, you can't use the other copy. But for Meister, the reason why it's kind of weird is because you are never allowed to use Meister during the damage step. You can only negate activations of cards during the damage step, unless there's like a card that says you can negate the activation and or effect. That's a completely different story. But for Meister, which only negates the effect, unfortunately you won't be able to, so it's not that great against Ray, that kind of gets triggered off of the Link monsters when you're destroying them by battle. But if you're clearing them off with card effects, for example, so on your main phase, well, you actually can use Meister against Ray, you can use Meister against all the Salamandrate effects in the graveyard, literally. So it's very similar to Ghost Belle a bit worse than DD Crow because DD Crow kind of stops the card, but also stops the card in a relatively permanent manner by kind of getting rid of the card even for the next turns because the resource is actually banished. Skullmeister is still very similar to Ash in so many applications. For example, Virtual World against the King Long effect in the graveyard, you can just Skullmeister it and it literally acts exactly like Ash. But again, I'm going to keep insisting on the fact that unlike Ash, it is now once per turn, so if your opponent actually goes for a lot of plays that are kind of similar, maybe sometimes the Chuche might have to, the opponent has to rely on the Chuche, you can read their hand and you know for a fact that if it doesn't resolve, they can't do anything, so you could negate that, you can negate the Zhuanhu, you can negate the Shen Shen in the grave, etc, blah blah blah. With that being said, the best application for Skullmeister is definitely against Prank Kids, because the Ash can be used on something a bit more generic coming from the hand, like a Pot of Desires, you can Ash that, and then when they go effect of a Prank Kid in the grave, then you can Skullmeister, and it's kind of as if you cheated and ashed your opponent twice in one turn, because the other hand traps don't really do that job. Like Ghost Belle, DD Crow, Valor Imperm, they don't really deal with the Prank Kid monsters at the very beginning. Ghost Belle, you can argue it's really good against Doodle Doo, because your opponent is actually trying to get 2 cards from the grave and does tribute for cost. I don't know how you guys actually think about Skullmeister. Do you think it's a great hand trap? I actually think it's a good enough hand trap to the point where you should at least consider playing it if your deck has the ability to play multiple hand traps. If not, well, whatever, you're probably going to be fine with Valor, Imperm, and Ash. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Peace.